So it was time to move my editing position out of the house and into the shop, or the quilting room in this case. This was just the logical location since my wife also needed some office space for her stuff, so this will be a shared space for both of us. I was finding myself building during the day in the shop and then editing into the early hours of the morning at night. I needed to separate the shop and the house so that I could enjoy more family time at the end of my long day in the shop. As usual, it all starts with the lumber. In this case, it starts with about 70 board feet of sapele. Pretty much all of my normal milling stuff here, so I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on it. Cut to rough length with the jigsaw, make one face flat at the joiner, and then joint one edge 90 degrees to that face. Then I get the other side flat at the planer, and then I rip to width at the table saw. Now normally I would do this at the bandsaw, but I just wasn't removing that much material from this stock, so I felt comfortable doing it. And of course, lastly, I sticker and stack this material to let it acclimate for a day or two before milling it one last final time. All of my offcuts from the tabletop material are 8/4, so here I'm resawing these to get 2 drawer fronts from each one of the offcuts. The question will be later, how do I use these matched drawer fronts? I have 3 different size drawer fronts, but I'll tackle that aesthetic hurdle when I get there. For now, I know I'll have drawer fronts and some options on how to apply the grain matching. So as I'm waiting for lumber to acclimate, I decided it was time to go ahead and get the base assembled. And of course, I had to give it a test drive. This thing certainly goes way taller than I'll ever need. While I do this standard glue up, I thought I should probably take a minute and actually show you what I'm building. I guess it would have been far more appropriate to do this before 3 minutes into the video. This will be an L-shaped sit-stand desk that has a case of drawers on each side. As usual, this is the rough SketchUp to keep me on track in the shop and allow me to grab dimensions as I need them. I'll spend the rest of today breaking down the old desk and getting it out of my wife's quilting room. I didn't take any video footage of this, but here's what the room looked like before I started. If you want to see this room better, I did a shop tour either last year or the year before, and at the end of that shop tour, I did a tour of my wife's quilting room. I'll post a link in the description. With the top out of clamps, I did a rough sanding just to get everything leveled out. Then it was time to cut the miters. The woodpecker's guide for the track saw really worked well to get the miters cut just right. I wasn't happy with the cleanliness of the cut, so I went back to the track saw and made a cleanup pass, with the track saw taking about a 1/16 from each side of the cut. This worked out really well, and the seam lined up very nice. I used the domino for alignment purposes. I used the tight setting on one side and the medium setting on the other side. I glued dominoes in on the tight side only. I'll be using countertop fasteners to hold the joint together without glue, which should allow for plenty of wood movement. To install the countertop fasteners, I used a Forstner bit to create the 2 holes on each side. Then I used a router with a straight edge to create the channel for the bolt itself. From there, it's just a matter of tightening them down. After finish sanding the bottom up to 180, I flipped the top back over and added a simple round over to the top. I didn't profile each end of the sides because that's where the side stands will sit, and I want it to look like one continuous desk. Then I sanded the top to 180 grit in preparation for the finish. The finish starts with water popping the grain first. The first part of this finish is mostly water, so this step just cuts down on that fuzziness on the wood. Off camera, I made the tops for the 2 side stands and got them profiled as well. This is so that all the tops can be finished at the same time for consistency. I believe you can see the tops there behind me. Next up is to flood the top with the potassium dichromate mixture. This mixture is about a 1/4 teaspoon of potassium dichromate to 1 quart of water. It's applied liberally, giving the wood pretty much all it wants. It's then allowed to dry fully before moving on to the next step, which is going to be a couple of coats of amber de-waxed shellac. The shellac is being applied fairly late in the day for me, so after putting on a few coats, I just allowed this to cure overnight. The next morning, I applied a burnt umber glaze and wiped it back fairly soon. This is a Mohawk product that I have a hard time finding here in the States. Sherwin-Williams Van Dyke Brown is fairly close, and that's a good option if you're in the States. I then followed this with a few more coats of the amber shellac to lock everything in. With the shellac fully cured, I'm using 180 grit on the sander just to smooth everything out. For what it's worth, I spent a great deal of time just cleaning this top in preparation for the final finish coat. Did I mention this finishing process is a little labor intensive? Last up in this finishing process is Rubio Monocoat Pure to achieve the final feel and look of the finish that I wanted. The sanding really makes it look like I just ruined the surface, but this final finish coat really brings the shine back. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. Unfortunately, now I have to flip these over and repeat this long process on the bottoms. I did follow this up with Rubio's maintenance coat just for a little extra sheen and protection, and I also dropped in the power ports. Next up, the side stands. I milled up the basic parts for the stands off camera, and I also marked for all of the domino locations, as that will be the primary joinery method for these stands. I cut all of the aprons first, and then I reset the depth on the domino to give me about a 1/8 inch reveal. For the record, there are 96 domino mortises to cut and 48 actual dominoes. With the dry fit looking good, I went ahead and marked for the locations for the grooves and the rails, and also created a couple of templates to take care of the curves later. I started at the table saw, set up with a 1/2 inch dado stack to cut all the grooves in the rails to accept the panels. Since I have these parts out, it's a good time to go ahead and cut all the curves in the lower aprons using the templates I made earlier to mark them. I'll cut them at the bandsaw. I'll sand and soften the edges on each part as I work them all the way through to 180 grit. I'll go ahead and check the parts for small flaws or defects or things that I need to fix now while it's easy to fix them. With all the grooves now cut in the aprons, I did another dry fit and marked the legs for the grooves. This dry fit gives me perfect alignment for the locations as well as start and stop points for the grooves. I believe a groove is with the grain and a dado is across the grain. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm using a 1/2 inch spiral bit because my panels are 1/2 inch. I start with a full depth cut at the start and at the end so that I have start and stop points. As normal, I'm using dual edge guides to help keep everything aligned. The last thing to do to these legs is to cut the small angles for the feet. I will clean these up at the bench and then take the entire leg to 180 grit, just like I did with all the other parts. I'll be doing the glue ups in a couple of subgroups, all of the sides first, and then I'll glue up the rest of the carcass, ensuring that everything is square. Anything out of square now will create a lot more work later when doing the drawers. The actual panel material here is 1/2 inch sapele ply. During the last dry fit, I was able to go ahead and get accurate measurements, so there were no issues with installing this panel. The panel gets no glue, it simply floats in all of the grooves that were created. Off camera, I installed some strips onto the lower rails to support the bottoms themselves. The bottoms are more for dust than structural, so will just be held in with a couple of pin nails. Or if you really wanted to and weren't concerned with dust, you could omit them altogether. With the bottoms in, it was time to install the Blum undermount drawer glides. These really are my favorite slide. They're super simple to install and just have loads of adjustments. They're a little more expensive, but in my opinion, they're worth it. After milling the poplar drawer material to 5/8 of an inch thick, I started the drawers by cutting the grooves for the 1/4 inch Baltic birch plywood bottoms. I could have used a dado stack here, but chose to just make 2 passes with the standard blade. This always works out well for me and lets me sneak up on the fit. Then I headed over to the drill press to create the 5/16 inch recesses for the plugs that I'll be installing later. These drawers will be a simple glue and screw construction with some sapele plugs to hide the screw heads. After slipping in the drawer bottom, I secure it to the drawer with 2 number 6 by 3/4 screws. This really is my favorite way to do this because the bottoms become replaceable later should there ever be damage to the drawer. There's a lot of fancy Blum jigs out there to install this hardware, but frankly, you don't need any of them. The glides themselves will give you the location for the hole in the back of the drawer, and the latches will give you the locations to attach those. And just like that drawer is installed. Since I'm waiting for the rest of my glides to arrive, I decided to go ahead and build the riser for the computer. This allows me to put the docking station underneath and hide most of the cords that need to plug into the docking station. I started with a simple panel glue up, which I then marked out and cut the basic shape with the track saw. I cut the notches out at the bandsaw and then cleaned everything up at the bench. I added some 1/2 inch thick sides to raise it up about 2 inches off of the desk, and I applied a 1/4 inch round over to the entire top. It's good to have this done so that I can finish this at the same time I finish the side stands. And here's a picture of the test fit. I only need to route the computer power cord, and I can check this one off the to-do list. With the glides finally here, I can finally get the drawers installed as well as the inset drawer fronts. I'm installing these fronts pretty much the same way as I usually do. I'm using a 1/16 inch spacer to allow for wood movement and securing the drawer fronts from the inside. I'll have to take these all apart to do the final finish. With the drawers finally done and fitting well, I can get after the plugs that I need to cover the screw heads. These are all cut from sapele with a plug cutter at the drill press, and then resawed at the bandsaw to pop them all loose. From there, it's just a matter of gluing them into position, flush trimming, and then a little cleanup with a chisel and some sanding to finish these drawers off. I didn't grab any video footage of the finishing process because the stands were finished exactly the same way as the tabletops. So I'm super happy with how this one turned out, and I'm really looking forward to editing lots of projects here in the future. The potassium dichromate finish really adds an age-classy look to the sapele. Pretty sure this is why the green and green builders have been using this finishing technique for a long time. The acoustics are definitely better in this room for sure, and as I stand here adding this voiceover, I wonder, why didn't I do this long ago? If you made it this far, I really appreciate your time. I hope you'll like and subscribe so you're notified as I release more videos like this in the future. Thanks again for watching and for your support.